everyone, welcome back to my channel. I thought for the month of May I would participate in Horror Mayhem at least with one book. And I wanted to capture the essence of the challenge this year, which is to read the decades of horror. So ideally reading an anthology or a collection of short stories or even novels that include horror from various decades of literature. And one of the things I love about horror is the sort of Halloween-y, maybe early stages of filmmaking as well that contribute in making it kind of folkloric in some way. Like when I envisioned the early Nosferatu or even the sort of pulpy Ed Wood films or the sort of, Creature from the Black Lagoon, it's just kind of like a fun hybrid of science fiction, horror, and films. So I chose to read this book called The Ghouls. This is edited by Peter Haining, and it has an introduction by Vincent Price and an afterword by Christopher Lee. And the fun part is that the majority of the stories here are not only classics and 20th century short stories, but they are stories that have been adapted to film. And for some of them, Christopher Lee and Vincent Price were in them, either individually, independently of the other, or together. And that kind of brings the whole anthology together in a beautiful, wholesome way. Now, the only downside to this collection is that sometimes the book is a lot longer and it's not complete in here. So for example, The Phantom of the Opera is part of this collection, but you only get a section of it, not the entire novel, right? So it's kind of a sampling and it's a vibe. And I think I'm all about that vibe right now and the mood it sets rather than going in depth. But I'm glad that I read this for Horror Mayhem. It just fit the bill. Now, another thing about the way that these stories are listed is that they are listed after the movie titles. And often you will have a classic or a new short story that's written and it's existing in literature under a title. And then it gets adapted into a film. And then later, other people write the novelization of the film. So for example, one of the stories in here is called Dracula's Daughter. But Dracula's Daughter was a film that was made as an adaptation of the short story Dracula's Guest, which I recently discussed when I reviewed Dracula. And then afterward, somebody made a novelization of the film under the title Dracula's Daughter. But here it was listed as Dracula's Daughter, even though it's that. So another example is an earlier adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's Color Out of Space. First, it was a film in the United States called Die Monster Die, and then in the UK, it was listed as Monster of Terror. Then when I saw it here and it said Monster of Terror, I'm like, okay. And then I start reading it and it's Color Out of Space. So I had to fill in the blanks. So the definition of ghouls is usually someone that's monstrous in appearance or in personality. So for example, you have ghouls as in the person who is hunting mankind in The Most Dangerous Game. You have stories in here like early filmmaker Georges Méliès, the guy who's very famous for the moon scene. And here we have The Lunatics by Edgar Allan Poe and The Devil in the Covenant. The Devil in the Covenant had a title about the devil in the monastery or something like that. Like, again, I feel like a lot of these titles are all over the place just because they don't match the actual written short stories. Rather, they're just in conversation with the films. I think it would have been a lot of fun to read one story at a time and then watch the adaptation. I just didn't have access to a lot of these films and I didn't have the patience to watch a lot of these old movies. But I think this would be so much fun to do around October or Halloween, to kind of return to this book and kind of sample a few stories and watch some of the films. But I do think it worked well with the challenge of Horror Mayhem. Another one in here was something I read from Weird Tales. So here's just called The Skull by Robert Bloch. And this was in the Weird Tales magazine where it even got the cover, and the full title is The Skull of the Marquis de Sade. and the cover is just spectacular. It's on my to buy list in the future. But then they shortened the title to just The Skull, and then the movie became its own thing, and then again it got put in here as just The Skull, but it's another story that I've encountered somewhere else. Another one that gets anthologized a lot is Robert Louis Stevenson's The Body Snatcher. So that's from 1884. Talk about decades. I've seen that in a lot of anthologies lately. Another one with a title change was Puritan Passions by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which came out in 1852 as Feathertop. And there were a few more shortened ones from the novel, which was bigger. Then we have The Fly. But yeah, overall, a really quirky, whimsical collection of kind of horror ghouls, I guess. And it's definitely something I think I'd like to return to in a more spooky season, because it's very, very good to pair them up with the films. Anyway, let me know if you've read this or if you've heard of it. It did have a different cover, which I'll put on the screen, in other formats. I think this might be the second edition. I'm really glad I got this. It was a fun read. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in a future video very soon.